Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
Great to be diving into this one today.
Absolutely. We are tackling a really significant book today, one that honestly might make you question pretty much every success story you've ever bought into.
Oh, for sure. We're talking about Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Fooled by Randomness, the hidden role of chance in life and in the markets.
And it's not just for finance folks, right? This book hits hard no matter what you do.
Definitely not. It's really a masterclass in critical thinking. Taleb calls it cognitive hygiene, which I love. And, his background is key here.
Right. He's not just some academic spinning theories.
No, exactly. He's been in the trenches, a crisis-hunting hedge fund operator, a derivatives trader. He's got the street cred plus the Wharton MBA, the PhD. He's lived this stuff. He practices uncertainty.
That experience just gives his writing so much weight, doesn't it? So for you listening, our mission with this podcast episode is pretty clear. We want to give you a solid, deep understanding of Taleb's big idea fast. And that idea is, well, basically that the world is way more random than we think,
Right.
or maybe than they're comfortable admitting.
Yeah, the book really exposes how often we see skill where there's just luck. Or, sometimes, the opposite, seeing patterns in randomness when things are actually deterministic.
He gets right into that confusion, doesn't he? With that table early on.
Oh yeah, the table of confusion. It's brilliant, puts it right out there. On one side, you've got the random stuff, luck, volatility, pure noise.
And on the other, the things we think we control, or at least understand better.
Right. Skill, return, the actual signal, determinism maybe.
And the danger is mixing those up. Mistaking the lucky person for the skilled one.
Or, and this is huge in finance, thinking that just because something bounces around a lot, volatility, that it guarantees a good long-term return. It doesn't.
Chasing noise like it's a signal. We do it all the time, apparently, in our jobs, investment.
It leads to really predictable mistakes. So, yeah, the way you'll break this down follows the book's structure. Part 1 is Solon's warning. That sets the philosophical stage. Talks about black swans, alternative histories.
Then part 2, monkeys on typewriters, gets into our heads, right? The biases.
Exactly. Cognitive biases, survivorship bias, all the ways our brains trick us.
And finally, part 3, wax in my ears. That sounds intriguing.
It is. It's Taleb's kind of stoic survival guide for dealing with all this uncertainty, how to live with it.
Okay, let's jump into part 1, Solon's warning. Where does that name come from?
It's a fantastic story, actually. Goes way back to ancient Greece. King Croesus, super rich guy, asks the wise man Solon who the happiest man alive is. Croesus totally expects Solon to say, "You, your majesty."
But Solon doesn't play along.
Not at all. He basically says, "Call no man happy until he's dead." Which sounds grim, but the point is profound.
Why? Because something terrible could still happen.
Precisely. Misfortune. A catastrophe. What Taleb later calls a black swan event. It can just wipe out everything that came before, so you can only judge a life or, an investment track record after it's finished.
That introduces this idea of alternative history.
Yeah.
Which seems central to the whole book.
It's the bedrock. You can't just look at the outcome you see. You have to consider all the other outcomes that could have happened but didn't. The full range of possibilities.
Which brings us right to chapter 1. If you're so rich, why aren't you so smart? And those two characters, Nero Tulip and John the Trader.
Yeah, Nero and John, they're like the two poles of Taleb's world. Nero Tulip is sort of the hero.
Okay. Why?
Because he gets it. He's skeptical, maybe a bit conservative as a trader, but he understands randomness. He knows it's the boss. He actually aims for small losses sometimes.
Wait, aims for losses. That sounds wrong.
Well, he sees them as insurance premiums. Tuition, basically. Paying a small price regularly to avoid the big, catastrophic loss. He's minimizing his exposure to those rare killer events. Survival first.
Gotcha. So he's playing the long game. And John?
John is. Well, he's the stereotype, the Wall Street hotshot. High-yield trader, makes a ton of money, probably drives a fancy car. Taleb calls him an overpaid hick at one point, which is harsh, but gets the point across.
Ouch. So what's John's deal?
Massive, often hidden risks. But the key thing is, John thinks his success is like 99.9% down to him. His genius, his skill, his perfect timing. He's got the swagger. Everyone respects him on the surface.
He believes his own hype.
Totally. And Taleb brings in biology here, which is fascinating. He talks about serotonin.
The feel-good chemical. How does that fit in?
Well, success, even if it's purely down to luck, can boost your serotonin. And that makes you feel more confident, more dominant, maybe even more aggressive in taking risks.
So John's confidence isn't proof he's good. It might just be a chemical reaction to getting lucky.
Exactly. It's a biological feedback loop. The luck makes him feel like a genius, which makes him take more risks, maybe get lucky again, until he doesn't. And it makes it incredibly hard for anyone else, like his clients or bosses, to tell if he's actually skilled or just riding a wave of good fortune.
Wow. Okay, that connects to the dentist versus the lottery winner example, right?
Huh.
John Doe A and John Doe B.
Perfect connection. Taleb uses this to make it really concrete for us. Let's say both end up with, I don't know, $10 million. Same outcome, seemingly.
Okay.
John Doe A is the dentist, built that wealth over decades. Steady work, careful saving, low-risk investments. The range of possible outcomes for the dentist was pretty narrow. Success was likely, ruin was very unlikely.
Makes sense. And John Doe B.
The lottery winner, one huge, improbable stroke of luck, boom, $10 million. But think about his range of outcomes. Almost certain poverty was the baseline. That $10 million was a wild outlier.
So the point isn't the final number, it's the journey, the
Right.
risk profile.
Precisely. It's the path taken, the distribution of possibilities. The dentist insulated himself from ruin. The lottery winner didn't. He just happened to avoid it this time. We need to compare the whole spectrum of what could have happened, not just the single reality we observe.
But we love the lottery winner story, don't we? The quick riches, the miracle.
Society celebrates it, which is why Chapter 2, a bizarre accounting method, dives deep into this concept of alternative history.
And the Russian roulette example illustrates that perfectly. It's pretty extreme.
It is, but it makes the point starkly. Guy plays Russian roulette, maybe with one bullet in a six-shooter, wins $10 million. He survives. People call him brave, a risk taker.
But he could have died. That was one of the alternative histories.
Exactly. 5 histories end in wealth, 1 ends in death. The observed history survival is totally misleading if you ignore the possibility of the fatal one.
This gets to that difference between correctness and sapience. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's crucial. Correctness is just the outcome. He didn't die. He was correct in that single instance. Sapience is wisdom. Was it wise to play the game at all, knowing the risk of death? Obviously not.
But we only see the survivors, the ones who were correct.
That's survivorship bias in action, what Taleb calls smooth peer relations. We hang out with the winners, the survivors, they write the books, give the interviews. The losers, the ones who weren't correct, they're silent. They're in the cemetery, metaphorically speaking. The world naturally confuses correctness with sapience because the evidence of foolishness often disappears.
Taleb seems particularly annoyed by commentators who don't get this. He mentions George Will.
Yeah, he critiques people, often journalists or pundits, who use kind of counterintuitive arguments to sound smart, but they miss the core probabilistic skepticism. They celebrate the risky bet that paid off without really grappling with the potential disaster or acknowledging all the people who took similar risks and failed.
So how do we actually see that distribution of possibilities? How do we avoid just looking at the single outcome?
That's where Chapter 3 comes in, a mathematical meditation on history. And the tool is Monte Carlo simulation.
Okay, Monte Carlo. Sounds like gambling.
Huh. Well, it's related to randomness, but it's a powerful mathematical technique. It's a way to visualize those alternative histories we were just talking about.
How does it work? In simple terms.
Instead of just looking at the one path things actually took, you use a computer to generate thousands, even millions, of possible random paths based on the underlying probabilities.
Like running the dentist's life 10,000 times.
Exactly. And running the trader's life 10,000 times right alongside it. Then you can see, okay, how often does the trader blow up? How often does the dentist end up comfortable? It shows you the typical outcomes and, crucially, how frequent or infrequent the rare ones are. It replaces relying on our flawed memory of the past with a statistical view of the potential futures.
And this helps distinguish noise from information. That seems really important, especially with investing.
Hugely important. Taleb uses the example of a retired dentist checking his portfolio. Let's say it's designed for a solid 15% annual return, but with, say, 10% volatility or standard deviation.
Okay, sounds reasonable.
If you look at it only once a year, the odds are really good, like 93% chance that it's gone up. You see the positive signal.
But what if you check it constantly? Like every day or every minute?
Then you're drowning in noise. Taleb calculates that if you check it minute by minute, the probability of it being up in any single minute is barely better than a coin flip, like 50.02%.
Wow, that's basically random chance then.
It is random chance at that time scale. The short-term movements are almost entirely noise, meaningless fluctuations. The real signal, the 15% annual return, is completely buried.
And checking constantly is painful, right? Because losses feel worse than gains feel good.
Exactly. That's basic behavioral economics. The negative pangs of seeing it down, even slightly, outweigh the positive feelings when it's up. If you check every second, Taleb says you might experience something like 1,796 moments of noise-driven pain for every one part of actual long-term signal.
So checking your investments all the time is literally psychological torture you inflict on yourself.
Pretty much. You're just reacting to random noise, causing yourself stress for no good reason.
But wait, does that mean we should just ignore everything? How do you know when something is important?
Ah, that's the key question. Taleb isn't advocating ignorance, he's advocating filtering. You need the right filter for the right timescale. If you're a professional trader managing positions second by second, okay, maybe high frequency matters. But for most of us, like that dentist.
We need a longer-term filter.
Right. Focus on information relevant to your long-term goals. Is the underlying strategy still sound? Has something fundamentally changed? Ignore the daily, hourly, minute-by-minute jitter. That's the skill. Filtering noise to find the signal.
Okay, so the noise is overwhelming in the short term. What about situations where the odds aren't even close to 50-50, but the potential outcomes are really different? That leads to chapter 6, right? Skewness and asymmetry.
Yes, skewness. This is super important and often misunderstood. It explains why frequent small wins can fool us into taking catastrophic risks.
How so? Isn't winning often a good sign?
Not necessarily. If the distribution is skewed, the median outcome, what happens most often, might look great, but doesn't tell the whole story if there's a small chance of a massive loss.
Like the gambler example he uses.
Perfect example. Imagine a game where you have a 999 out of 1,000 chance to win $1. You play, you win, play again, win again. 99.9% of the time, you're winning. You feel great, confident, skilled even.
But what's the catch?
The catch is the 1 in 1,000 chance. On that one occasion, you lose $10,000.
Oof, that changes the math considerably.
Completely. The expected value of playing that game is actually negative $9 per play. 0.9999, serious row 99 equals 9.001. You're statistically guaranteed to lose money over time, even though you're winning almost every single time you play.
That's what Taleb calls the mother of all deceptions.
Exactly. You're seduced by the high frequency of small wins, and you ignore or massively underestimate the low frequency, high impact catastrophe, the negative skewness. You're focused on the fat middle of the bell curve and blind to the skinny but potentially lethal tail.
And this applies way beyond gambling, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about selling complex financial options or investing in seemingly stable currencies that occasionally crash, or even certain business strategies. People optimize for the common scenarios and forget the rare event that bankrupts them.
Because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
We look at our own experience, the time series.
Right. We think, well, it hasn't blown up in the last 10 years, so it's safe. Taleb says that's flawed thinking. You need to think in terms of ensemble probability, all the things that could happen in parallel universes, if you like not just the one path you've happened to walk down so far.
Like the Mexican peso example before the '94 crash. It looked stable for years.
Lulling everyone into a false sense of security. They piled in, chasing the yield, ignoring the small but real possibility of a massive devaluation. And when it happened, it wiped out years, even decades, of those small, steady gains. They mistook the low frequency of the disaster for its impossibility.
Which brings us to the philosophical core in Chapter 7, the problem of induction. Solon's ultimate warning, really.
Yeah, induction is how we naturally reason, right? The sun has risen every day, so it will rise tomorrow. We see repeated patterns and assume they'll continue.
But philosophers like Hume pointed out there's no logical guarantee.
Exactly. Just because something has happened consistently in the past doesn't prove it will happen in the future. Taleb connects this directly to Karl Popper's big idea, falsification.
Popper said science isn't about proving things right, it's about proving things wrong.
Precisely. A theory is only strong, only scientific, if you can potentially disprove it. You shouldn't be looking for more evidence that confirms your belief, like finding more white swans if you believe all swans are white.
You should be actively looking for the thing that breaks the theory.
Yes. Look for the black swan. That's intellectual honesty. That's rigor. Trying to falsify your own ideas is the best way to make them stronger, or discard them if they're flawed.
So how does Taleb apply this to practical life or finance? He uses Pascal's wager as an analogy.
Right. We can't know the future with certainty. Pascal argued it was rational to bet on God's existence because the potential upside, heaven, was infinite, and the downside, wasted prayers, was finite. Taleb adapts this.
Wow.
He says, given we can't know the future, the rational strategy isn't to try and predict it perfectly or maximize every small gain. It's to manage our exposure to catastrophic failure, protect the downside.
Build robustness, not optimize for perfection.
Exactly. And the practical tool for that is the stop loss.
Ah, the predetermined exit point.
Yes. You decide in advance how much you're willing to lose on an idea, an investment, a project. If it hits that point, you're out. No questions asked, no second guessing, no hoping it will turn around.
It protects you from that black swan, the unexpected ruinous event.
It caps your downside. John, the reckless trader, has no effective stop loss. His potential losses are unlimited if things go really bad. Nero, the wise trader, uses them religiously. He accepts those small, guaranteed losses from the stop-loss triggers as the cost of insurance,
The cost of survival.
the cost of staying in the game. You pay that premium to ensure you don't get wiped out by the one event that takes you off the board permanently. You survive to potentially benefit from positive randomness later.
Okay, that wraps up the core philosophical and mathematical warnings of Part 1. Let's move into Part 2. Monkeys on Typewriters. This title refers to the idea that enough random chance can produce anything, even Shakespeare, right?
Yeah, the classic thought experiment. Infinite monkeys banging on infinite typewriters will eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare. But it doesn't mean the monkeys are literary geniuses.
It's just random chance producing a seemingly meaningful outcome.
Exactly. And part 2 is all about how our own minds and the way society is structured make us see genius monkeys everywhere. We're fooled by the random outcomes.
Chapter 8 hits this hard. Too many millionaires next door. This is about survivorship bias, isn't it?
Survivorship bias is maybe the single biggest theme, yeah. It's the illusion created because we only see the winners, the survivors. We systematically underestimate failure because the failures are invisible.
Like looking at successful companies and trying to copy them without seeing all the companies that tried the same thing and went bust.
Precisely. Or looking at the people living on Park Avenue, like in Taleb's example of Mark and Janet.
Tell us about them.
Mark's a successful finance guy, maybe pulling in $500,000 a year. He absolutely attributes it to his skill, his hard work, his brilliance. He's confident, lives large.
Seems reasonable if he's making that much.
But Taleb contrasts with his neighbor, an accountant. The accountant earns less per year, works fewer hours maybe, but over time has built up similar wealth through steady, low-risk accumulation. Mark's success looks flashier, but it's built on a riskier foundation.
And Mark hasn't hit his black swan yet.
Exactly. He's a survivor so far. His visibility is partly due to the fact that the catastrophic market event that could wipe him out simply hasn't occurred during his observable track record. We don't see the graveyard of traders like Mark who did blow up.
Because the failures don't write memoirs titled, How I Lost Everything Trying to Be Mark.
Exactly. They disappear. They're too broke or too embarrassed. So the narratives we get are overwhelmingly from the lucky survivors, who then naturally attribute their survival to skill, not luck. It creates a totally warped picture of reality.
This leads right into Chapter 9. It is easier to buy and sell than fry an egg. This deals with data mining, finding patterns where there aren't any.
Yeah, data mining or data snooping. Looking back at historical data and finding apparent patterns or correlations that are just statistical flukes, products of randomness.
Our brains are pattern-matching machines after all.
They are, and we're very good at it, sometimes too good. Taleb uses the birthday paradox to show how common coincidences really are.
Right, just 23 people in a room gives you a 50-50 chance of a shared birthday. Feels unlikely, but mathematically it's true.
It shows our intuition about probability is often way off. Life is just full of coincidences, and if you look hard enough, you'll find apparent connections everywhere.
And people can exploit that, like the mysterious letter trick.
Oh, that's a classic con, and it perfectly illustrates data mining in action. Imagine someone wants to pose as a market guru. They send out, say, 10,000 letters. Half predict the market will go up next week, half predict it will go down.
So 5,000 people get a correct prediction, just by chance.
Right. The next week, the guru only writes to those 5,000, sends 2,500 predicting up, 2,500 predicting down. Again, half are right.
And they keep doing this.
Keep doing it for, say, 10 weeks. By the end, you'll have a small group, maybe 10 people, 10,000 divided by 210, who have received 10 consecutive perfect market predictions.
Those 10 people will think this person is a genius. They'll pay anything for the next prediction.
Of course. But the guru's skill was entirely manufactured through random chance and systematically eliminating the failures from the sample. It's pure selection bias.
That is deeply worrying. And it connects to the backtester problem in finance technology.
Yes, the programmer who builds software to find profitable trading strategies by crunching historical data.
Sounds useful. What's the problem?
The problem is, if you test enough random rules on enough historical data, you are guaranteed to find strategies that would have worked in the past purely by chance. You're essentially doing the mysterious letter trick on historical prices.
Finding patterns in the noise, confusing correlation with causation.
Exactly. The backtester finds a spurious correlation, thinks they've discovered a secret edge, but it has no predictive power because it was just a random artifact of the past data. It won't work going forward.
Taleb also uses a medical example, right? Alternative cancer cures.
Yeah, and it's a sensitive but important point. Sometimes, very rarely, cancers go into spontaneous remission. It happens naturally in a small percentage of cases.
Right.
Now, if someone is trying an alternative, unproven therapy during that time and they happen to experience a spontaneous remission,
They'll attribute the cure to the therapy.
right, they confuse the event, the rare remission, with the noise, the therapy they were taking. They create a causal link where there might be none, failing to account for the baseline randomness of the disease itself. We have to separate the signal from the noise.
This idea that things aren't always straightforward, that small things can have big effects, that's chapter 10.
Yeah.
Loser takes all on the nonlinearities of life.
Yeah, non-linearities. Life isn't neat and linear like you put in X effort, you get Y result. Sometimes randomness kicks in with what Taleb calls non-linear viciousness.
Meaning small causes can have huge disproportionate effects.
Exactly. He uses the sand pile analogy. Imagine dropping single grains of sand onto a pile. Grain after grain just adds a tiny bit to the pile. Small cause, small effect, predictable, linear,
Until
one single grain triggers a massive avalanche, a huge disproportionate collapse of the pile. That one grain wasn't much different from the others, but it hit a critical point.
So markets, careers, even historical events can be like that sand pile. Stable for ages, then suddenly a small thing triggers a huge change.
Very much so. It means outcomes can be highly path-dependent. What happens early on, even randomly, can set things on a course that leads to massive success or failure later, regardless of intrinsic merit.
Like the QWERTY keyboard example.
Classic example. The layout was supposedly designed to slow down typists on early machines to stop jams. It's objectively not the most efficient layout.
But we're stuck with it.
We're stuck with it. Because it got established early on through historical accident, a random path. Network effects took over. Everyone learned it, so manufacturers kept making it. Path dependence.
And Taleb suggests big successes, like Microsoft's dominance, might have elements of this. Not just pure genius, but benefiting from being in the right place at the right time, establishing a standard.
Right. It doesn't mean Bill Gates isn't brilliant, but path dependency and network effects, often triggered by initial chance events, play a massive role in these winner-takes-all or loser-takes-all scenarios. Superiority doesn't always win. Sometimes historical luck does.
Why are we so bad at grasping these probabilities and nonlinearities? Chapter 11 says it's our brains. Randomness in our brain. We are probability blind.
Basically, yeah. Our brains didn't evolve crunching probability distributions. They evolved to make quick decisions based on simple stories and heuristics.
Kahneman and Tversky's work is key here. Prospect theory and biases.
Absolutely foundational. Their work showed experimentally how irrational our choices are when faced with uncertainty. We overweight certainty, we're loss-averse, we rely on simple narratives. Taleb says we suffer from option blindness.
Option blindness, meaning we don't see the full range of possibilities.
Yeah, we don't intuitively process the probabilities correctly, especially when they're skewed or complex.
Like the Paris versus the Bahamas vacation problem he mentions.
Great illustration. Imagine an investment opportunity. There's a 72% chance it leads to a wonderful outcome, survival, maybe a great vacation metaphorically, and a 28% chance of complete ruin, losing everything.
72% sounds pretty good. Better than 7 out of 10.
Our intuition screams, go for it. But Taleb forces us to calculate the linear combination weighting the outcomes by their probabilities. If that 28% chance of ruin means losing everything you have and more, the potential negative consequence might be so huge that it outweighs the high probability of success.
Especially if ruin means you can never invest again.
Exactly. The impact matters as much as the frequency. But our brains struggle with that calculation. We fixate on the 72% chance of winning and downplay the 28% chance of annihilation. We're probability blind.
And the media doesn't help, does it? Taleb is pretty critical.
Very critical. He argues financial media often makes things worse by focusing on noise, presenting simplistic narratives, and failing to communicate uncertainty properly.
Like the weather forecast example.
Perfect. They say, tomorrow's high will be 60 degrees. Sounds precise. Sounds like a signal. But they often fail to mention the confidence interval or variance. Maybe the forecast is 60 degrees, plus or minus 30 degrees, meaning it could be anywhere from freezing to sweltering.
Huh. That's not very useful information then.
It's almost useless, but the single number sounds authoritative. Financial news often does the same, reporting tiny market fluctuations as if they're deeply meaningful, without context about the overall volatility or randomness. They amplify the noise and neglect the signal, and they rarely talk about the range of possible outcomes.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. Randomness is everywhere, and our brains are wired to misunderstand it, amplified by societal biases and media noise. How do we live with this? That brings us to part 3. Wax in my ears.
Exactly. This part is about developing defenses, a philosophy for navigating this randomitis, as Taleb calls it. The title comes from Homer's Odyssey, right?
Odysseus plugging his sailors' ears with wax, so they wouldn't be lured onto the rocks by the sirens' deadly but beautiful songs.
Right. The siren songs are like the noise, the random signals, the misleading narratives. We need to put wax in our ears, develop internal filters and discipline to avoid being shipwrecked by them.
So Chapter 12, Gamblers, Ticks, and Pigeons in a Box, deals with our tendency to invent causal links.
Yeah, the illusion of control. Gambler's tics are those little rituals people develop, blowing on the dice, wearing a lucky shirt, tapping the screen a certain way.
Believing somehow their actions influence the random outcome.
It's completely irrational but deeply human. Taleb saw sophisticated traders doing similar things, and the explanation often goes back to B.F. Skinner's experiments with pigeons.
What did Skinner find?
He put pigeons in a box and delivered food pellets at random intervals, completely unrelated to the pigeons' behavior. But the pigeons started developing weird ritualistic behaviors, turning in circles, bobbing their heads, pecking at a certain spot. Why? Because whatever the pigeon happened to be doing when the food pellet randomly arrived, it associated that action with the reward.
It created a false sense of causality. I bobbed my head, therefore food appeared.
Exactly. They developed superstitions based on random reinforcement. And Taleb argues we do the same thing. A trader makes a killing while wearing a specific tie, and suddenly that tie becomes lucky. We constantly invent causal stories to explain random events because randomness itself feels uncomfortable, meaningless.
So if we're prone to superstition, we need active skepticism. Chapter 13, Carneades comes to Rome.
Carneades was an ancient Greek philosopher, a skeptic with a capital S. He famously argued in Rome, demonstrating he could argue convincingly for and against justice on consecutive days.
Showing that certainty was elusive.
Precisely. His point, in Taleb's, isn't that truth doesn't exist, but that absolute certainty is usually unattainable, especially about the future or complex systems. The best we can aim for is high probability. We need what Taleb calls the probability of skepticism.
Meaning we should constantly question our own beliefs and the certainty of others.
Yes, and understand that beliefs themselves are path-dependent. Once we adopt a belief, even a wrong one based on faulty induction or randomness, it's really hard to shake it. Confirmation bias kicks in.
So that initial framework, that skeptical starting point, is crucial.
It really is. Taleb advocates relying more on calculation, probabilistic models, and Popper's falsification principle than on gut feelings, narratives, or expert pronouncements. Compute instead of think, as he sometimes puts it. Test your beliefs rigorously. Try to break them.
Which leads us finally to Chapter 14, Bacchus abandons Antony, and the ultimate defense, Stoicism.
Yeah, Taleb leans heavily on Stoic philosophy as the practical way to live with unavoidable randomness.
How does Stoicism help? Isn't it just about being unemotional?
That's a common misconception. It's more about understanding what's within your control and what isn't. You can't control external events, the market crashing, getting unlucky, Bacchus abandoning Antony, Bacchus being the god of wine and fortune, leaving Antony before his final defeat.
But you can control your response to those events.
Exactly. Your judgment, your actions, your inner state. Stoicism is about maintaining dignity, integrity, and emotional equilibrium, regardless of what fortune throws at you. It's about focusing on virtue and rational action, not getting swept away by fear or euphoria based on random outcomes.
He contrasts this with Epicureanism, seeking pleasure.
Yeah, he sees Epicureanism as potentially relying on the illusion of victory, focusing on external validation and transient good feelings. Stoicism offers an inner resilience, You define your success by your dignified response to fate, not by fate's whims themselves.
He mentions Jackie O's funeral as an example of this personal elegance.
Right. Facing tragedy or misfortune with grace, composure, and dignity. That, for Taleb, is the ultimate way to win against randomness. You can't control the outcome, but you can control your conduct. Acting with personal elegance means randomness doesn't get the last word on your character.
Even when you lose, you maintain your integrity. You defeat randomitis internally.
That's the core idea. It's a powerful mindset for dealing with a world you fundamentally cannot predict or control perfectly.
And then the epilogue brings it back with a jolt. Solon told you so. Beware the London traffic jams.
Yeah. It's that final reminder. Even if you do everything right, like our hero Nero Tulip, manage risk, build robustness, practice stoicism, a completely random, unforeseen event can still get you.
Like getting stuck in traffic and missing a helicopter that then crashes.
Exactly. A black swan emerging from an unexpected direction. It underscores that vigilance against the improbable is a lifelong task. Robustness helps, but absolute safety is an illusion.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to absorb. Let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. What are the absolute core takeaways from this deep dive into Fooled by Randomness?
I think there are a few key things. First, really internalize the difference between noise and signal. Most of what you see and hear, especially in the short term, is noise. Learn to filter it.
Second, survivorship bias is huge and everywhere. Always ask, where are the failures? What am I not seeing? Don't just copy the winners.
Third, embrace skepticism, especially about your own beliefs and overly confident predictions from others. Remember, Popper, try to prove things wrong, not right.
And finally, focus on robustness over optimization. Aim to survive the bad times, protect yourself from ruin using things like stop losses, mentally and maybe financially. That stoic elegance helps here too.
Right. The goal isn't necessarily to be the absolute best in the short term. It's to make sure you're still around in the long term. Avoid the negative black swans. You're still playing the game if a positive one comes along.
So here's a challenge for you listening. Think about how you can apply this stuff, like this week.
Yeah, pick a success story you admire, maybe a famous entrepreneur, an athlete, even someone you know personally, and really try to dissect it. How much was skill and process, and how much might have been luck, good timing, path dependence.
Be a randomness detective for a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe think about where a stop loss could be useful in your own life.
It doesn't have to be financial. Is there a project, a commitment, maybe even a belief you're holding on to? We're defining an exit point, a point where you say enough is enough, regardless of sunk costs, could protect you from a much bigger loss down the line.
That's about prioritizing survival and limiting potential damage. It's a really practical application.
Definitely. And look, we've covered a lot, but there's so much more depth in the book itself, the anecdotes, the nuances of the math.
Absolutely. We strongly encourage you to actually get the book, Fooled by Randomness, The Hidden Role of Chance in Life and in the Markets by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Read it. Wrestle with it.
And Taleb is quite active online, especially on social media. Engaging with his ongoing thoughts about risk and uncertainty is a great way to keep challenging your own thinking. Don't just take our word for it, or even his word in the book. Keep questioning.
We really hope this episode has given you, well, a new set of glasses for looking at the world. A more skeptical, more realistic, and maybe ultimately more robust way of seeing things.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with is this. If Taleb's right, and much of visible success is just randomness we haven't seen the downside of yet, then maybe true wisdom isn't about predicting the future,
but about preparing for its potential nastiness, being ready for anything.
Exactly. Preparing for the worst, hoping for the best, but building your life on the preparation, not just the hope.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Playing Books podcast.
It's been great discussing this. We really hope you'll follow, subscribe, maybe share this with someone else you think would find it valuable, anyone trying to make sense of this crazy random world.
Until next time, stay skeptical.
And stay robust.